to say thank you again to the Smiths. They have let us use their house over and over and over again. And they have been a great asset to us and very loving to us, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Y'all are what makes Chi Beta the best thing that has happened to so many people. It's not the club, it's y'all. So thank you for being here. And then lastly, thank you to Ben for asking me to speak and for giving me this topic. When he said more than once that this is something that he's been planning for years. And when he gave me Peter and when he gave me growth and when I looked through it, I found out and I figured out just exactly how intentional he is with everything that he planned, how intentional Ben was with planning this semester. Because as I looked at Peter and as I studied him, as I followed his growth from point A to point B, I saw myself a whole lot in him. Just because Peter was the guy that was always talking, Peter was the guy that was always sticking his foot in his mouth, Peter was the guy that was always going out of his way, Peter was that guy that always asked the questions, that always spoke, that always messed up, and I relate with that on a very personal level. But through everything that we know about Peter, you go and you look at it throughout Scripture, and every lesson that you hear is about him and looking at him almost in a negative way, in a negative light, just for being that kind of guy that's always talking, always sticking his foot in his mouth. But what you see is in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1, he says, "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness for the sufferings of Jesus Christ." Did you catch it? "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder." So you mean to tell me that guy that was just this fisherman that didn't know any better, that was always messing up, that was always being a little bit too extra, too over the top, is a guy that at the end of his life writes a letter and proceeds to say that he is an elder? And then you look and you see that elders are guys that have to be temperate, that have to have self-control, that are guys that have to be gentle and respectable, not violent. How in the world do you have one guy that is at one spot spiritually in the Gospels and then another guy that writes 2 epistles, that preach the first gospel sermon, that is a spiritual giant? Growth. From point A to point B, from the beginning of his ministry, the beginning of his discipleship to the end of it, Peter was just this constant evolving story of growth. And that's what I absolutely love about it, is because you can watch him grow along the way. You can watch him get spiritually stronger and spiritually greater as you go throughout his entire life and everything that we have recorded about him. So I guess the question is how? Every step that we're about to look at, everything that Peter did, is hopefully going to be something that you can use as a pattern, something that you can look at, that you can see, that you can apply in a way that can help you to grow the same way that Peter grew. And notice that each one of these things that he did, none of them were timid. Each one of them were bold, which leads us to the conclusion that there is no way for you to grow and no way for you to get from point A to point B the way that Peter did without being bold. It's a necessity. Now, the first thing is he was honest with himself and other people. In John chapter 6, verses 66 through 69, you have Jesus that just got done preaching this sermon, and he had all of these disciples that were around him, and a lot of them began to leave, began to turn tail and go home. And as he has just this small group left after everyone has gone and realized the cost of being a disciple, and they didn't want to pay that cost, he looked at who was left and he said, y'all can leave too. Y'all can go just like everybody else. Y'all can go back home. It's really okay. Peter's response was, "Lord, I don't have anywhere else to go. There's nowhere else that I can get salvation except for right here by your side with you." He knew exactly what he needed. He knew exactly where he was going to get his growth from. He was honest about it with himself. He was honest about it to God. He knew that he couldn't just leave Jesus and go out on his own and get where he wanted to be spiritually. He knew that it was going to take something greater than him, something bigger than him. It was going to take a Savior. So ask yourself, What is it that you need to be honest? What is it that you need to tell yourself tonight? It's going to be different for every single person. Where is it that you need to start and be honest about what starting point you need spiritually in order to grow? And then back in 1 Peter chapter 2, he says, verse 1, so put away all malice and all desire and all hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Now, this is the verse I want you to notice. Like newborn infants, long for the pure milk of the Spirit, pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation. There's only one way that you're going to grow, and you've got to be honest with yourself, because I think so many times we get into this really bad habit and this really bad rut, and we tell ourselves that because I grew up in the church, I'm farther along spiritually than I actually am. Because I go to Freed-Hardeman University, a Christian college, the best Christian college in the United States of America, that I'm farther along spiritually than I really am, than other people are. Because here's a good one, I'm in Chi Beta Chi. Oh, I'm an officer in Chi Beta Chi. I'm part of the spiritual club. Therefore, I'm farther along spiritually. The first step to growing is being honest with yourself and telling yourself exactly where you're at and exactly what you need. And don't skip to the meat, don't skip the milk, just thinking that it's what you're supposed to do because of how long you've gone to church or where you go to school or what club you're in. Because you're not going to be able to grow the way Peter did without that kind of brutal honesty. And then once you're honest with yourself, the next thing is you've got to ask questions. That was something that you see Jesus put Peter in his place a lot throughout his entire ministry. When Peter was by his side and when Peter was saying things and when Peter was asking things, Jesus was guiding him and correcting him a lot. But you know what? Check this out. There are so many things that we would have never heard Jesus say and never have a record of Jesus saying if it wasn't for Peter asking those questions. Have you heard quite possibly from Matthew chapter 15 when Jesus says what comes from the mouth proceeds from what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart? That quote that connects what we say and how we act with the real intentions of our hearts. That would have never been said had Peter not asked the question just a few verses prior. If you look down in Matthew chapter 18, when you hear, this is one you all know, don't forgive someone 7 times, but forgive them 77 times. That would not have been said had Peter not started that discussion with Christ by asking a question. And then in Matthew chapter 20, so the first will be last and the last shall be first, also came and was also said in response to a question that Peter was willing to ask Christ. Things that all of us know, things that all of us have heard sermons about, things that are just a part of Christian life, that are a part of going to church. Never would have happened had Peter not dug deeper and asked questions. It's not just about going through the motions and going through the routine and going through your Bible study and going through your prayer, but it's about digging deeper. It's about reading a passage and then asking why, and then doing whatever it is you have to do to find the answer to your question. Find the answer to your why. Scratching more than just the surface spiritually. And that's what Peter did. And guess what? That's when Peter got his little reputation for sticking his foot in his mouth, was by asking questions. But while the whole world was looking at him and pointing at him and laughing at him for sticking his foot in his mouth, Peter was in the background growing. Peter was in the background working. Peter was in the background getting stronger and closer to Christ every single day. Don't be too nervous or too worried or too scared to ask the questions that you want to ask. To other people, to God. But if you're going to ask them, be bold enough to go and find the answer. Then the last thing that we see in the life of Peter is after his honesty is probably my favorite thing. When you look at growth, everything that we know in society is so fast. So fast. I don't want to wait for a meal, so I'm just going to microwave it. I don't want to watch commercials, so I'm just going to TiVo it and fast forward through it. I don't want to put in the work to get bigger and stronger, so I'm going to inject myself with stuff. Like, you can go on and on and on. Our society has wants, and then they want to get them as soon as possible. They don't want to have to wait. They don't want to be patient. Growth is something that is going to take time, and if you decide tonight that you're bold enough and you want to be bold enough to grow, then don't expect to wake up tomorrow morning and be Jesus Christ, or be Paul, or be whoever the spiritual rock is or spiritual pillar is in your life that you look up to. Just because you had that desire and want to grow, you're not going to wake up tomorrow or in a week or in a month or in a year and be there or be where you want to be. Peter had a very long life of ups and downs in his spiritual growth, and that is probably the best thing about him. And then the reason why we're looking at him in growth tonight is it wasn't this straight linear line that was always progressing and always moving forward. It's one that is jagged, with ups and downs, but also with persistence and perseverance through every single down. Because you've got to understand, guys, that Peter, the guy that we're talking about tonight, the guy that was an elder, the guy that was temperate, the guy that wrote 2 epistles, is the same guy that denied Jesus 3 times. Just as bad as Judas betraying him. The Peter that preached the first gospel sermon on the day of Pentecost that will forever go down in history is that man. Thousands of conversions is the same Peter that couldn't keep his eyes on Jesus when he was walking on the water and began to sink. The Peter that we see in Acts chapter 12 that is being arrested and brought up out of prison by an angel because of the gospel he's proclaiming, that goes to extents to all ends of the earth, that goes and prays for boldness in Acts chapter 4, is the exact same Peter that Jesus had to say, Peter, tone it back a little bit. What's going to happen is going to happen. Don't cut off Malchus's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter wasn't the kind of guy that just took on discipleship and was on this straight line of perfectness and just kept growing and growing and growing and growing and doing it without any hiccups or without any mess ups. Understand, guys, if we're going to grow, that it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a road that has to have persistence, that has to have Jesus as the pinnacle, and our love for Him's got to drive us through every situation. But know that at the end of the day, despite all the ups and despite all the downs, you'll eventually get where you want to go. You'll eventually get to that spot where you're riding as a fellow elder, and having all of those qualities and all of those characteristics and having yourself together the way that you and I both want to have ourselves together. Don't try to microwave your spirituality. Don't try to fast forward it. Don't try some magic trick or some magic whatever to get you there. Instead, be willing to be honest with yourself. Be willing to ask those questions and dig deeper. And know that along the way, it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be filled with ups and downs, but you have to be prepared for them, and you've got to know how to get yourself out of the downs and how to capitalize off of the ups. I guess as we close and as we look at Peter, the only thing that can really sum this up, and the only thing that I'm trying to apply with my growth that I hope you are able to use the same way I am is it's not about waking up tomorrow and being who you look up to, but it's about waking up tomorrow and being better than the person that you were yesterday, and continuing to do that over and over and over again.